Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in a state where a knock on the door in the middle of the night could mean you'd never see your family again? Where a misplaced Joseph Stalin's secret police force word, a casual joke, or even just knowing the wrong person could lead to your disappearance? This wasn't a dystopian novel. For millions, this was the terrifying reality of life under Joseph Stalin, enforced by his infamous secret police. Today, we're pulling back the Iron Curtain to expose one of the most feared organizations in history. When you hear Stalin's secret police, the name that probably comes to mind is the NKVD. And you're not wrong. The NKVD, or the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, became the ultimate symbol of Stalinist terror. But the story of Soviet state security didn't start with them. To truly understand the NKVD, we have to go back to the very beginning of the Soviet Union, to its founder, Vladimir Lenin. Just weeks after the Bolsheviks seized power in 1917, Lenin established an organization to defend the revolution from its enemies, both real and perceived. He called it the Cheka. Led by the ruthless Felix Dzerzhinsky, a man known as Iron Felix, the Cheka's official mission was to combat counter-revolution and sabotage. In practice, this meant a brutal campaign of arrests, torture, and summary executions known as the Red Terror. The Cheka set a terrifying precedent, that the state could operate outside the law, using extreme violence to maintain power. They weren't just a police force. They were an instrument of political warfare, a sword and shield for the Communist Party. This foundation of fear and extrajudicial power was the bedrock upon which all future Soviet secret police agencies would be built. After the Civil War ended, the Cheka was formally disbanded in 1922, but its spirit lived on. It was immediately replaced by the GPU, later known as the OGPU. On the surface, this rebranding seemed like a move towards a more conventional state security agency. But in reality, its methods remained chillingly familiar. The OGPU expanded the network of labor camps, which would later evolve into the infamous Gulag system. They continued to persecute political opponents, religious groups, and anyone deemed an enemy of the people. It was during this period that Joseph Stalin was methodically consolidating his power after Lenin's death. He saw the immense potential of the state security apparatus. For Stalin, it wasn't just about protecting the state. It was about molding it to his will. He began to place his loyalists in key positions within the OGPU, transforming it from a tool of the party into his personal weapon. The stage was being set for a level of repression the world had never seen before. The OGPU laid the groundwork, perfecting the techniques of surveillance, intimidation, and political control that would be unleashed with terrifying efficiency by its successor. In 1934, the OGPU was absorbed into a new, even more powerful organization, the NKVD. This wasn't just a name change. It was a massive consolidation of power. The NKVD controlled not only state security, but also the regular police, border guards, firefighters, and crucially, the sprawling network of Gulag labor camps. This gave its leader unprecedented control over Soviet society. And the man Stalin chose to wield this immense power was Genrikh Yagoda. Yagoda oversaw the early stages of Stalin's Great Purge, a brutal campaign to eliminate all opposition within the Communist Party and the military. He organized the first of the infamous Moscow show trials, elaborate, staged events where prominent old Bolsheviks were forced to confess to fantastical crimes against the state before being executed. Under Yagoda, the NKVD's machinery of terror was refined. Arrest quotas were established, and the use of torture to extract confessions became standard procedure. But in the paranoid world of Stalin's inner circle, no one was safe. Yagoda, the master of terror, soon found himself on the receiving end. In 1936, Stalin, believing Yagoda wasn't pursuing enemies with enough zeal, had him removed from power, arrested, and eventually executed. His replacement would unleash a new, even more horrifying chapter of fear. Stalin replaced Yagoda with Nikolai Yezhov, a man whose sadism and cruelty were legendary. Yezhov was short in stature, earning him the grim nickname, the Bloody Dwarf. His time in charge from 1936 to 1938 is known as the Yezhovshchina, or the Yezhov era, and it represents the absolute peak of the Great Terror. Under Yezhov, the purges escalated dramatically. The NKVD was given quotas, not for traffic tickets, but for the number of people to be arrested and executed in each district. These quotas were often exceeded as local officials scrambled to prove their loyalty. The terror was no longer confined to the party elite. It spread to every corner of Soviet society. Engineers, writers, scientists, factory workers, farmers, no one was immune. An anonymous accusation was enough to seal one's fate. NKVD officers driving black cars nicknamed Black Ravens would arrive in the dead of night. Families would be torn apart, with husbands, wives, and even children sent to the Gulag or executed in the cellars of prisons like the infamous Lubyanka in Moscow. During the Yezhovshchina, an estimated 1.5 million people were arrested, and nearly 700,000 of them were shot. Yezhov had turned the Soviet Union into a slaughterhouse, all to satisfy the paranoia of one man, Joseph Stalin. But like his predecessor, Yezhov's loyalty was not enough to save him. Once the most intense wave of terror had served its purpose, Stalin needed a scapegoat. Yezhov, the butcher, was arrested, accused of being a foreign spy, and executed in 1940. The instrument of terror was consumed by the very system it had created. The man who replaced Yezhov was a name that would become synonymous with the dark heart of Stalinism, Lavrenti Beria. Cunning, ruthless, and utterly depraved, Beria was perhaps the most powerful and feared of all Stalin's secret police chiefs. He took command of the NKVD in late 1938 and would remain at the head of the security apparatus until Stalin's death. Beria initially scaled back the sheer scale of the terror, even releasing some prisoners from the Gulag. This wasn't an act of mercy. It was a calculated move to present himself as a reformer, cleaning up Yezhov's excesses, all while consolidating his own power. Beria was a master administrator of terror. He made the Gulag system more economically efficient, turning it into a vast slave labor empire that fueled the Soviet war machine. During World War II, the NKVD's role expanded even further. They managed internal security, hunted for spies behind the lines, and enforced brutal discipline in the Red Army with blocking units that would shoot any soldier who tried to retreat. Beria also oversaw some of the war's worst atrocities, including the Katyn Forest Massacre, where the NKVD executed 22,000 Polish officers and intellectuals. After the war, Beria was put in charge of the most critical project in the Soviet Union, the development of the atomic bomb, a task he accomplished with ruthless efficiency using intelligence gathered by NKVD spies and the labor of Gulag prisoners. Beria's power was immense, second only to Stalin himself. He was the gatekeeper, the enforcer, and the ultimate survivor. The terror apparatus was a vast and complex machine. At its core were the NKVD officers, men who were trained to see enemies everywhere. They were often driven by a mix of ideological fanaticism, careerism, and fear for their own lives. But the NKVD couldn't operate alone. They relied on a massive network of civilian informants. Neighbors spied on neighbors, colleagues on colleagues, and children were even encouraged to inform on their parents. This created a pervasive atmosphere of suspicion and fear that tore apart the fabric of society. No one knew who they could trust. A single careless word could lead to a denunciation, an arrest, and a journey into the abyss of the Gulag. The Gulag was the final destination for millions. It wasn't a single place, but a vast archipelago of brutal labor camps stretching across the Soviet Union, from the frozen wastes of Siberia to the deserts of Kazakhstan. prisoners endured starvation, disease, and backbreaking labor in mines, logging operations, and construction projects. The mortality rate was horrific. The Gulag was the physical manifestation of Stalin's tyranny, a system designed not just to punish, but to dehumanize and destroy. On March 5, 1953, Joseph Stalin died. His death sent shockwaves through the Soviet system. For a brief moment, Lavrenti Beria, the master of the secret police, seemed poised to take supreme power. He initiated a series of liberalizing reforms, denouncing the excesses of the past and releasing 1 million prisoners from the Gulag. But his colleagues in the Politburo, men like Nikita Khrushchev, were terrified of him. They knew that as long as Beria controlled the security apparatus, none of them were safe. In a daring move, they conspired against him. In June 1953, just months after Stalin's death, Beria was arrested. He was accused of a litany of crimes, and after a secret trial, executed. The death of Beria marked the end of an era. The party elite was determined to never again allow one man to wield such terrifying power. In the aftermath, the security apparatus was once again reorganized. In 1954, the NKVD's successor organization was officially named the KGB, the Committee for State Security. The KGB would become a legendary force during the Cold War, famous for its foreign espionage. But its domestic role was also curtailed. While it remained a powerful tool of political control, the era of mass terror, of quotas and midnight arrests on an industrial scale, was over. The state's power to execute its own citizens without trial was reined in. The legacy of the NKVD, however, left an indelible scar on the psyche of the nation. It served as a grim reminder of how a state, in the name of ideology, can turn on its own people with unimaginable cruelty. The story of the Cheka, the OGPU, and the NKVD is a chilling lesson in the corrupting nature of absolute power and the fragility of human freedom. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into one of history's darkest chapters. If you found this video informative, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what other historical topics you'd like to see covered. Until next time, stay curious.